Before we begin proceedings, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of country throughout Australia and their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. I pay my respects to the elders past and present and extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are present here today. Since this is a virtual event, I encourage you to include the lands you are on, if you know that, in the chat function. So welcome. We had a terrific day yesterday and I'm looking forward to another terrific day today. So we will start off with a policy panel on the Retirement Income Covenant, followed by two more concurrent sessions and then a final plenary, which will take us through to the end of the day.
This panel session on a topic that is of great interest, the Retirement Income Covenant. I've just been told it will go to Parliament this afternoon, the legislation. My name is John Piggott. I'm the Director of CEPAR, and it's my privilege to chair this session. We have four very distinguished and complementary speakers. Jordan George, who is from the Australian Treasury. Suzanne Smith, who's the Executive Director for the Superannuation Division of APRA. Robbie Campo, who is the Group Executive Brand Engagement, Advocacy and Product at Cbus, an industry fund. And finally, Jeremy Cooper, who is well known to all, Chairman Retirement Incomes at Challenger. So that's the order in which these people will present. They will have 10 minutes each, and then we will have time for Q&A. You can enter questions on the chat function, or you could hand raise when they have finished their presentation. So I don't plan to take questions through the four presentations. They will run sequentially. And then at the end of that, we will have a more general panel discussion. So could I invite Jordan George to the podium, please?
Thank you, John, and thank you everyone for having me here this morning. It's a great opportunity from a Treasury perspective to discuss our recent work on the Retirement Income Covenant and where that's up to and what we hope the policy can achieve. I have some slides which I will share and kind of go through those as part of my presentation. So Retirement Income Covenant, this is something that has been really a long time coming. And when we think about the policy problem that the covenant's trying to solve, really it's about the underdevelopment of the retirement phase in superannuation. And this is something that has been considered by a number of reviews. There's a very kind of strong evidence base that supports the need to make this change, which is something, as John alluded to, is kind of happening right now. The legislation for Retirement Income Covenant was introduced last week into the House of Representatives, and fingers crossed it's scheduled for debate in the House this afternoon. So last sitting day of the year today. So obviously we'll be waiting for that to be passed into the Senate and through the Senate early next year, hopefully. So just as a matter of background, as kind of what came before the introduction of the covenant as legislation. Like I said, there's a number of inquiries and consultations that have supported the introduction of this legislation. And I think there's one element on this screen that, especially given our panel today, I'd be remiss not to mention, and that's the Cooper review. So Jeremy's review also noted the need for greater development of retirement phase, starting this process. And I think Jeremy's recommendation, his panel's recommendation was that My Super products should include a income stream product that looks at longevity and inflation risk and should have a whole of life focus. And unfortunately, Jeremy, I have to say, I think the reason why I didn't make this slide was, as one of my younger staff members told me, they were still in primary school while the Cooper review was being conducted. So they that one slipped them, but not for me. So then the financial system inquiry was kind of the next substantive review that really lent into this space. So the FSI made some strong recommendations about the lack of products and choice for retirees to actually have options for how they draw down in retirement phase. And that recommended the very well-known acronym in the super industry of CBUS, so Comprehensive Income Products for Retirement. And the government agreed with the findings of the Financial System Inquiry in 2015 as part of their response, and committed to doing something in this space. There was consultation around that, which saw kind of broad support for reforming and improving the retirement phase of super, but not necessarily consensus in what element should be taken forward. And then the government did commit to introducing a retirement income covenant as a broader part of a retirement income framework in its 2018-19 ageing package. After that introduction, there was an initial consultation on the retirement income covenant, and this consultation included a view that the covenant should include CEPARs as part of the covenant, so that there would be a prescriptive requirement for trustees to offer a product as part of them meeting obligations under the retirement income covenant. I think consultation from the outcomes of that consultation was strong support for the introduction of a covenant, but also strong opposition to a compulsory offering of a CEPAR. And that was something that we've obviously reflected on in the current version of the legislation that's in front of Parliament now. So coming through that, we have consulted again this year. We put out Treasury put out a final position paper, which established the government's preferred approach. It had a approach without CEPARs being integrated into the covenant, and that was very much broadly supported by industry, especially the flexible principles-based approach that was put forward. So it had broad support for that, and that was the basis of legislation which was consulted on. Again, broad support for the legislation, and now that is in front of the Parliament. So hopefully that is passed early in 2022 with the covenant commencing from application commencing from 1 July 22 next year. So what is in the covenant? So really the covenant, like I said, is a principle-based piece of legislation. It is not prescriptive, and it does give a lot of freedom and discretion to trustees to design a retirement income strategy for their members as they see fit to meet the profile of members in their fund. And this was a very important policy decision from government and from Treasury in terms of legislative design, because it really does give primacy to the idea that trustees know their members best, and it is best to give trustees the ability to craft strategies for their members that has not been prescribed to them by legislation. So it does give a lot of flexibility in how trustees can go about doing that. Really, the covenant comes down to balancing three key objectives, and this is the policy objectives we have set for the retirement phase at a very high level. It is one, to maximise retirement income. We've done this on the belief and the evidence base that maximising retirement income is a key facet in improving living standards for retirees. And what we really want to see here, I guess, in terms of policy effect, is stepping away from the kind of current culture of conservatism and anchoring to the minimum drawdown rate for those who have account-based pensions, and having a more efficient drawdown pattern, so maximising that income. But we do expect that to be balanced against other criteria, and one is managing risks to sustainability and stability of retirement income. So these obviously include things like inflation risk and longevity risk. So there is a kind of competing demand of maximising income, but also making sure that your savings will last and deal with longevity risk. And finally, the last kind of issue that we wanted to include was flexible access to savings. And we know this is a important requirement for most retirees, is that they, even though they would like to have guaranteed or a higher source of income, it's also important for them to have access to some savings for lumpy expenses throughout their retirement. So those are the key principles that the covenant expects trustees to consider when creating a retirement income strategy for their members. And they have to be balanced against each other. And it is within the discretion of a trustee about how to do that. So these strategies have to be formulated for members who are in or approaching retirement. And it is up to the trustee to have discretion to decide whether there are different cohorts of members that they may choose to have different strategies for. And cohorting is really at the discretion of a trustee about how they do that and what criteria they choose to use. The explanatory memorandum, which is currently before the House of Representatives, does have some examples of criteria, such as age, gender, marital status, employment status of those approaching retirement, and things, balance, things like that, that could be used to decide on what cohorts a trustee may decide to create different strategies for. One of the key questions and issues has been raised with us throughout crafting the policy and also consultation on it has been about guidance and advice. And so how does the strategy fit with the provision of financial advice for super fund members? Under the strategy, there is no strict requirement that, under the covenant, there's no strict requirement that a trustee would need to include financial advice in their strategy. It is at the choice of the trustee to do so. And currently, it is expected that any advice provided as part of a strategy for a fund's members would be done in the existing advice regulations and laws. So that is something that has been quite a common question and a lot of feedback about, and something that I think we'd still need to kind of consider about how the covenant and advice rules fit together. A couple of final comments on, I guess, requirements of the covenant is that we do expect them to be, a summary of them to be published on trustees' funds websites, so that there is transparency for members to compare different funds strategies. And we do expect these strategies to be in place by 1 July 22 next year, but that does not mean that they have to be fully implemented on 1 July 22 next year. So we want to have a strategy in place, but that means there still may be work to do for funds in implementing the rollout of their strategy. So in terms of next steps, I've talked about where it is in the Parliament. So it's in the House of Representatives at the moment, hoping for it to be debated and passed through the House this afternoon, and that would advance to the Senate early next year when sitting resumes. Some other things that are important around the covenant and adjacent to it is the current ASIC consultation paper on their class order around superannuation forecast and calculators. So this is out for consultation at the moment, closing in late January. And I think a lot of the feedback we had around this policy was how important calculators and income projections are in preparing members for retirement and helping them make choices. So we're from a Treasury perspective, we're going to watch that consultation quite closely and see what the industry's feedback is there, and see if there's further need for reform. The quality of advice review is also coming next year, and that is something that is going to be issues around how retirement advice is provided. I think will be looked through that lens. So consistent feedback from industry to us has been that current advice legislation is not fit for purpose for providing advice in retirement phase, and that is something that will be looked at in terms of the advice review, and government will take future decisions on that then. Some other future issues that we're kind of aware of in terms of trustees implementing the covenant is data gaps. So we are aware that some trustees are concerned that they do not have access to data around their members or publicly available data that can assist them in doing this cohorting exercise, and there is potentially a role for government to assist by providing government-held data to funds to assist through that, and that's something that Treasury is currently looking into. We are always at Treasury, we kind of ongoing look at barriers to provision of retirement income products. It is something that there have been reforms on a few years ago in terms of innovative income stream rules, and we continue to evaluate those rules. And as the covenant comes into operation, we're going to keep a close eye on whether there needs to be further reforms in that space. Disclosure is also another important area. We're thinking of need for further policy assessment. So if we do have more products created in the retirement space, it is important that members are able to compare them and understand different offerings. And so disclosure requirements will be really important about giving members a simple way to compare different retirement income strategies in products. And finally, often left out in policy discussions, but a really important facet will be a need for us to continue ongoing evaluation of the covenant and its success in changing retirement phase. Not something we necessarily expect to happen instantaneously as 1 July 22, But I think it'll be very important from a government perspective to keep assessing how the behaviour of trustees and members changes in line with the introduction of a covenant from next year onwards. So, John, that concludes my presentation, and as we discussed, happy to take questions later.
Thank you very much, Jordan. Let me now turn to Suzanne Smith.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Jordan, and good morning, everyone. And thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today in this colloquium on behalf of APRA. We're very supportive of and draw great insights from the work of the Centre for Population and Ageing Research in this, not only this, but many other topics. So in considering the retirement income covenant from the perspective of the prudential regulator and indeed other regulatory perspectives, I was asked to talk about the regulatory issues and challenges. And hopefully what I'll say today will build on the comments that Jordan has just taken you through. And depending on the mindset, issues and challenges can connote problems and hurdles to be overcome. However, when APRA considers the retirement income covenant, we can see beyond this to the opportunities. And just sharing what we think some of those opportunities are, opportunities for policymakers and regulators to make meaningful headway into this wicked industry and societal challenge in terms of efficient consumption of retirement savings by Australians. Opportunities for trustees to best serve the needs of their members as they reach retirement and to innovate and add value through the offerings, and opportunities for members to improve the quality of life in the various phases of their retirement, to understand and better manage their income needs and risks in their old age. So in the hurly-burly of implementation of proposed new legislation, these opportunities can be easy to miss. But forums like we're here today provide an opportunity to step back and reflect on what a unique opportunity we have now to improve the lives of millions of Australians in their retirement. So on that note, let me run through how APRA views the opportunities and how we're working with peer agencies to assist the superannuation industry in harnessing these. So what is APRA doing? Public submissions by industry participants and stakeholders to Treasury, like Jordan just outlined, as part of its consultation around the proposed covenant, emphasised an appetite for guidance from APRA in a range of areas, from matters that could reasonably be interpreted as clarification of points of law through to insights into supervisory expectations. So firstly, let me make clear that APRA will not issue guidance that would seek to clarify the intent of the law. The explanatory memoranda accompanying the legislation is the appropriate place to seek this information. However, APRA does, see beneficial opportunity to outline its expectations of trustees at commencement of the proposed new covenant, which will assist trustees in meeting these obligations. So APRA therefore intends to communicate with trustees once the legislation is passed, and will outline our views on pathways to implementation. We will wait for the legislative process to run its course so that we can focus on potential changes to APRA's prudential framework that target the issues that matter. APRA also sees an opportunity for trustees to show leadership in driving the direction of strategic and product innovation. We see an opportunity for industry participants to observe, learn from, and compete with each other in this space. And we see great opportunities in regulators taking a measured approach to evolving regulatory expectations in the initial stage of industry implementation and iteration. And that was where Jordan talked about that need to have a strategy, but it not being necessarily the end point once it's launched. In time, trustees can expect APRA to consult upon adjustments to existing and the introduction of new prudential standards and guidance in support of the proposed covenant, having observed evolving practices and evaluated the necessary standards. And trustees can expect APRA's laser focus on robust governance, clear measurement of outcomes, and the core tenet of members' best financial interest to be themes that run through our policy setting and supervisory approach. To be able to measure outcomes in the post-retirement space, APRA will first need meaningful data on retirement offerings. An area of focus, therefore, will be on ensuring that we have appropriate data on retirement offerings, which will be targeted in phase 2 of our superannuation data transformation project. So what does APRA expect of trustees? The proposed addition of a new retirement income covenant to be added to the existing covenants in the Superannuation or the CIS Act is a significant milestone for the industry. The change will require trustees to innovate in support of improving retirement outcomes for individuals and to provide superannuation members with more financial confidence in retirement. Stepping back and looking at the opportunities for trustees, the proposed covenant seeks to address concerns that members struggle to develop effective retirement strategies on their own, and in the absence of a strategy, take benefits as lump sum or where income streams are selected, favour account-based pension drawdowns at minimum levels. Set in this relief, the introduction of the proposed retirement covenant provides trustees with an opportunity to take a quantum leap in making a difference to the quality of life of their members in retirement. As a trustee director, if this type of change doesn't inspire and excite you, then you're probably likely in the wrong game. From a commercial standpoint, as my colleague Helen Rowell outlined to the attendees at the Australian Financial Review Super and Wealth Summit earlier this month, this is a space that's ripe for good innovation by those organisations with the acumen and possibly the courage to grasp the opportunity. But as with any opportunity, I would agree with Helen that this one is not risk-free. In seeking to meet rising demand for retirement income products, it is critical that the challenge to innovate is undertaken in a thoughtful and considered way without creating the legacy issues that we've seen in the past. We do not want to see a proliferation of high-cost, poorly performing new retirement products as seen in the choice sector of the superannuation industry, where consumers are bamboozled by having too many, often not very different, products to choose between. Over the coming months, in support of the implementation of the proposed covenant, it's likely that trustees will start to formulate a retirement income strategy in anticipation of the covenant becoming law. We think this will have trustees asking themselves questions about what membership data they have and need, how their product governance could be invigorated, and whether the business performance review conducted as part of SPS 515 has revealed opportunities for improved retirement outcomes. Trustees have all of the tools they need to make this work. The challenge is to take the first step and then iterate from there. Before taking that step, however, APRA does expect that it will be necessary for trustees to give careful consideration to whether they have in place the resources, be those human, technical and financial, needed to implement, and then continue to evolve a retirement income strategy and take necessary steps to access those resources. Taking up the theme of APRA's Margaret Cole's challenge to the Fund Executive Association at its member discussion forum last week, this evolution will also require trustees to consider whether their boards have the right mix of skills and capabilities to ensure their entities are at the forefront of good practice, not waiting to be cajoled by regulators. Consistent with the theme of many of APRA's public messages in recent times, and frankly our private conversations with certain trustees, the outcome of that careful consideration for some trustees will be that the milestone is a jumping off point for their fund and its members, acting in their best financial interests. If your board or a board that you are advising is gulping at the work involved in meeting the proposed new covenant, APRA expects you to do the right thing by members now rather than waiting. So how is APRA working with other agencies? I mentioned earlier linkages between the proposed covenant, the business performance review, and the design and distribution obligations. So you can infer there that there's a close linkage between APRA and ASIC in terms of the implementation of the proposed covenant, which also runs to matters such as our agency's interactions with the provisions of quality advice and member-centric tools such as retirement calculators. APRA and ASIC are also closely collaborating with Treasury and the Australian Tax Office on both the regulatory framework aspect of this set of reforms and, importantly, in terms of new product innovation, sandboxes and regulatory approvals. The clear message from us is that we expect to see innovation and we are open for business in considering well thought through risk-aware products and concepts that will better serve members in retirement. So with that invitation to innovate, I'll pass back to John and welcome your questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. So let me turn the podium over now to Robbie Campo.
Thank you, John. Like the other speakers, I'm really delighted to be contributing to this very important conversation today at the colloquium. My name is Robbie Campo. I'm the Group Executive for Brand Engagement, Advocacy and Product, and am the executive leading our work on retirement at Cbus. So I'm very passionate about being able to deliver improved outcomes for our members and also contribute to you know, better system outcomes in terms of the drawdown phase of retirement. So from the perspective of a larger fund, we really welcome the imminent passage of the retirement income covenant requirements. We think that the certainty that this framework will provide will certainly assist funds in being able to now progress the significant amount of work I think that will need to be done to develop more sophisticated offerings, including product offerings, and also the broader programs that will be needed to support members in engaging with, understanding and selecting those products to improve their outcomes in retirement. We're particularly pleased that the covenant will give trustees the flexibility to tailor their offerings to the needs of their members. Obviously, that's something that Cbus has been very vocal about, because our membership does look quite a bit different to system average, with our members having a quite different working life, starting work early, facing precarious work throughout their working life, more likely to have super contributions not paid. A very significant issue for them for retirement is that they're typically not choosing their retirement. They're having to retire early and not on a voluntary basis. So that means they've had less opportunity to save in addition. Also, demographically, less likely to have been educated and lower financial capability. So these are all factors that will inform our strategy. And of course, importantly for us, by the time this new requirement kicks in, we'll have a new cohort of members who are the media super members we're in the process of merging. So we'll have another cohort that we need to be thinking about. Like most funds, I think we'll deliver a strategy by the time this requirement kicks in, but it will be implemented over a number of years. So certainly I think there'll be, you know, a number of innovations that we seek to apply. So our strategy will be done by commencement and then implemented over a number of years. So just turning to the process of strategy development. So obviously we already do a lot for our members in retirement. We have a leading income stream product, and we do a lot in terms of the way we seek to engage members and support sound decision making. So as we've already done, our strategy development will be soundly based on evidence, looking at how they engage with us, what the data suggests their needs are, and also an intensive process of designing using our members' responses and inputs. This is important to ensure our products, but also importantly, the experience that we wrap around our products will be responsive to our members' needs. So in thinking about developing a strategy, obviously we look at our members and, you know, clear cohorts that exist within that. Designing something that works for individual members will need to help them understand how their own circumstances play into the decisions they need to make. Although I think sometimes we make a little bit too much about the heterogeneity of members' circumstances in retirement. We see that there are really clear cohorts, and strategies that are likely to work, you know, within those cohorts will apply across large numbers of our members. Initially, we're thinking really one of the key factors is age pension entitlement. There are really, especially when you're thinking about what retirement products make sense for members, three clear cohorts. Those who receive the full age pension, which is the majority of our members going into retirement, and actually I think still, you know, largely true across the broader population, where age pension is still the primary source of retirement income. But of course, there'll be, you know, as the system matures, a growing number who are part age pension eligible or above eligibility for the age pension. Of course, there are other variables that will inform the development of cohorts, marital status. Most of our members are married in retirement, whether they own their own home or not. And very importantly, the stage of retirement that members are in, because there are clearly quite different needs of members at the different stages that they're at. It's not just the point of retirement. The legislative objectives set out in the bill focuses trustees' minds on 3 clear objectives: maximising retirement income, helping to manage risks related to sustainability and stability of income, and helping members have some flexibility in terms of accessing capital for lump sum needs. So these really speak to what a retirement income product will help members with. But in our mind, the broader components of the strategy will be very important as well. So we can have leading products, but if members don't understand them, don't engage with them, they'll be left on the shelf. So in our mind, just as important as the product development is the experience that we wrap around that and the support and education that we can provide to help members. The strategy will also need to look to, broader topics, the investment strategy that will support this, risk management, data, technology, and of course, as Suzanne mentioned, also really thinking about how we assess the performance of the strategy, what process we put in place for review, and of course, how we discharge other important regulatory obligations. There's financial interest duty. Obviously, this will be quite a significant program of work. So we are already thinking about how we might measure member outcomes against these new covenant requirements. So in addition to what the legislation points to in terms of objectives, some more basic measures will be likely, especially initially, which is just seeing an improved take-up of retirement income products. I think not unlike other funds, we still have a reasonable cohort of members who get to retirement and withdraw their money, and many put this in the bank. So, we know that members, even those with really modest balances, will see their retirement income maximised by not withdrawing it from the system. So their money will certainly last longer in an income stream than in a bank account. And importantly, also our research shows that even a modest income stream will vastly improve the quality of life when added with the age pension than the age pension alone. So this is really important in terms of ensuring better outcomes for members. We'll look at how members engage with the material and support that we provide them. So member engagement and that experience, very key to the success of this strategy in our mind. And I think importantly, having a strategy which looks at different cohorts will require the assessment also to be taken against the outcomes that are delivered by cohort. So I thought I'd also just perhaps briefly speak to some of the challenges that we anticipate and that we'll work through. And, as the other panellists have noted, this will be an area where we'll see evolution and sophistication in offerings. And so these will be challenges that we'll need to work through. I'll start with member mindset, and I really should have called this member mindset and capability. So the Retirement Income Covenant is clearly intended to facilitate the provision of more sophisticated retirement income products that will help members manage the drawdown phase. And very different considerations and risks exist for members at this point in their life. And the one that's often pointed to is running out of money. But ironically, and as Jordan pointed to, actually, our system has been defined by very conservative behaviour. So in the absence of having an understanding of how they can safely draw down money, too many members in our system die with their super, too much of their super unspent. So having a system where there's unfettered choice about the options members might take up means that members are navigating a very complex mix of considerations. So they have their superannuation, how it interacts with the social security system, the uncertainty of how long they will live, how long their partner will live, what their health needs will be, what their housing needs will be, if they have the option about choosing when they retire, what the tax implications are, if they have debt, what should they do with that, and then how they factor in any capital needs. And on top of this, we obviously have issues with financial capability. I mean, these are complex issues to work through. And in addition to that, we have the psychological biases, which I'm sure the audience here will be very familiar with. And I did pick out a few quotes that are actual quotes from our members. And I think they really do help illuminate, just some of the things that members are thinking about and concerned about in terms of how they work through these decisions. I think it's fair to say that longevity products are not an intuitive choice for individuals. So helping them understand what the risks are and how it helps them manage that will be an important thing for us to get better at. So we'll be focused on designing products that won't overwhelm or intimidate our members. We want them to be simple. We want them to be understandable. We want to be able to demonstrate clearly what the benefit will be of, various options that they might consider. And as I've already mentioned, I think the experience that supports, guides, educates, offers advice will be very important to help members navigate these choices and also overcome cognitive biases. The next issue is data. And again, that's one that's already received a few mentions. I think that both in terms of the system and as a trustee or an employee of a trustee, there are obviously significant gaps in what the system knows about members and what you really need to know in order to inform a good strategy. And then again, another level of data will be required in order to support individual members and nudge them to good outcomes. So an obvious piece of data that we won't necessarily know is the circumstances of the member's partner. And obviously at the point of retirement, financial decision-making needs to contemplate the household, not the member. So that will be something we'll need to develop strategies and mechanisms to improve the data that we hold, both on aggregate and in order to support and guide individual members. The last challenge area that I thought I'd speak to is regulatory obstacles. I must have been in a bit of a cranky mood when I did this PowerPoint. So I think, as others have pointed to, there is a need for other areas of the regulatory framework to align to support the retirement income covenant. And I think these are already areas, as has already been covered by Jordan and Suzanne, that are squarely on the agenda. So I think the review of advice will be very important. And Cbus, along with many other funds, have requested for revisions to be made to the scope of intra-fund advice, and particularly to help funds support members in that consideration of their household. And we'll certainly be making submissions on that basis. Retirement income products are quite complex, and members will need assistance in order to improve their retirement outcome. So guidance and advice at that individual level will be very important. And our analysis shows that members do benefit from guidance and advice and are much more likely to commence an income stream and consider an income product when they do engage with the support that can be provided to them. In our view, we shouldn't build a retirement income system or products which really requires every single member to get personal advice. That would be counterproductive and is not really the kind of sustainable system that supports good member outcomes. The last two areas, retirement income estimates, which again have already been mentioned, but it's an area that Cbus has done a lot of work in. We're big advocates of retirement income estimates. We do see them as being, almost a silver bullet. They really just crystallise for members and paint out for them. It reframes the way they think about their superannuation. And we really welcome ASIC consulting on their relief in this space. We'll certainly be making a submission. And we really welcome some of the areas that have been flagged, which will enable trustees to deploy retirement income estimates in a broader range of circumstances, but would really encourage that we think about how they can be deployed in decision-making around retirement, because we do think that they just work to completely reframe what superannuation is about. And I will just close off with one point, which is The EM does note how the retirement income covenant interacts with anti-hawking laws. And as a trustee, we are disappointed. We do think that it's a poor outcome if laws which we support around preventing anti-hawking would prevent a member, while having a conversation with a representative of the trustee, from being able to have a discussion about a retirement income covenant. Of course, it will be possible. The way the EM points to, which is consistent with our understanding of the current laws, is that there would need to be a pause and an opportunity to consider a PDS before you pick up a conversation. But our opportunities for engagement with members are few, and we really think where it's an existing provider, the risks are low. So we would really encourage some rethinking of that. So I'll leave my comments there and welcome questions.
Thank you very much, Robbie. Before we get to questions, can I ask Jeremy Cooper to conclude this panel presentation?
Okay, look, thanks for setting the scene so well to my co-panelists. My task really, and it's great, and I'm delighted that Jordan picked up the fact that very similar ideas were recommended in the Cooper review. So it's been a sort of a 12-year personal journey apart from anything else. So I'm very glad to be talking at this session, and also very glad to have been given the topic around making it work. And what I've done, I suppose, is I've thought about, well, who are the key stakeholders in this project? And I really liked Suzanne's comment that if this doesn't inspire you, maybe you're in the wrong business. I thought that was a great segue to this session. So I think the legislation is only 3 pages long, and it is high level. So I think there is a requirement on the part of fund trustees and other executives in the fund, within the fund, to really engage with the spirit of it, because this is an important reform. Arguably, the super system, or at least the retirement phase, is really not fit for purpose. It's just a rebranded accumulation phase with different tax treatment, frankly, at the moment. And this reform will change that. So I think the industry's got to engage with the spirit, and I don't want to sound sort of remonstrative there, but when I walk, sort of do the rounds and talk to people, there's a lot of positive engagement. That wasn't always the case, but I think the industry is very ready and very keen to, funds are very keen to distinguish themselves in this space. That's great. I think Robbie made the point, it's not just about whacking new products on the shelf. It's far more about explaining what's in it for the members. And I think this, and a lot of people are on this bandwagon, that the idea of being confident to spend your retirement savings, which after all is what they're for. So I think that should be the focus of funds vis-a-vis members. Regulators, I think, given the fact that this is new, principles-based, and there are not many significant legislative reforms that get done in 3 pages. The legislation is very good, but I think it's going to need both creativity and leadership on some of the key issues. And I'm actually going to disagree with Suzanne. I think guidance on some points, not prescriptive, but just highlighting some of the issues and so on is absolutely going to be necessary. And many of the other covenants have got prudential standards going with them. So I'm going to differentiate myself on that point. I think consultants and the peak bodies have got to really support the industry to get to best practice as soon as possible. And I think on the part of product issuers, yes, innovation, yes, innovation can be a pejorative. Not all innovation is good. And I think the real aim is to keep it as simple as possible, and don't build what I've called monsters on those slides, but don't build things that are almost destined to become legacy products. For the government, I think it's done a great job so far. I do think it needs to set some fairly clear expectations of regulators, both ASIC and APRA, because this is a policy rollout, and I think they each have a I think some guidance from ASIC on some of the advice issues would certainly be handy, specifically addressed at this very important reform. So I think I may have missed some stakeholders, but I think each category has their own role to play, and we really do need to learn from history that legacy problems are a problem, but I think we ought to be sort of pre-solving for this. So I think this is going to be good for members. I also point out that other large and emerging DC systems are watching very closely. The US are very much poised to go in this direction. The UK as well, and even New Zealand, I would think, will be watching quite closely. So we really got to get this right. So I think in terms of making this work, I think things, Robbie has already mentioned advice. I think we're just going to have to accept the reality that all of the advice issues that are floating around that people think might be, it might be better to have those resolved. That's all going to have to wait for the quality of advice review in 2022. That's just life. We're just all going to have to get on with it. And I think on that vein, and in that same theme, I think we just need to be careful not to let perfection be the enemy of the good here. I mean, we've just got to work with what we've got. And that leads me into the next point of, well, look, in a perfect world, this would be easier to implement if we had actually legislated a purpose for super and that this linked in intimately and directly with that legislated purpose. We didn't get there, and we're just going to have to move on with what we've got, I'm afraid. So that's just life with these things. Member data is an issue. I think the industry itself has got to take some responsibility for the poor quality of a lot of the data out there. And again, yes, there'll be gaps. I think I say on talking about this that the regime that we have in 2032 will be vastly improved and better than the one that we roll out next year. And indeed, it will probably take far less than that for the gaps to be closed up. And I agree with Robbie's observation that we make a little bit too much of the heterogeneity of members, I think. And so we just, again, need to just move on to that. And I think also, Suzanne touched on this, if your fund, and this goes for consultants and so on as well, if you're dealing with a fund that simply lacks the scale or I put it there, the governance muscle, simply can't pull off a well-designed retirement income product, don't go it alone. Get partner up with somebody else or seek a third-party provider. And I'm not just saying that because I work at Challenger. I think we really do need to avoid, situations where there is either a lack of scale or a lack of governance to get things done. This is going to put quite a governance strain on all funds. And as you go down the food chain, if I can put it that way, I think it just gets more and more difficult. It is principles-based, so I'd urge everybody, and I don't think anyone listening on this call needs to hear this, but I think it needs funds to engage with the spirit, as I said before, of this legislation and not looking for loopholes. If you haven't already picked up Helen Rowell's speech of only a few weeks ago now, barely that, at the AFR Super and Wealth Summit, it was absolutely a cracker of a speech. And I've just got two little, these are two quotes, basically. But the first one is from the very beginning of the letter, and the last one was right at the end. There were some other gems in there. But she was really playing around with the nest egg that, of course, is so familiar to all of us in this industry. And indeed, it was an image used in the retirement income review to convey the idea that people have this egg, but it never hatches or they never break it open and eat it. But there were a lot of really good points made in that speech about the opportunity that this industry, particularly on the insurance side, has to respond to this reform. So I recommend that to you. Good inspiration. So really, in summing up, one of the key ideas that the sort of elevator pitch, the one-line bullet point is, what are we doing this for? We're giving members the confidence to spend. It's that easy. Rome wasn't built in a day, and what I mean by that is, look, don't try and reach perfection at the outset. That'll be iterative. And I think in this process, we really need to ask ourselves, what's the measure of success in retirement? And I'd be really interested in Suzanne's views on this. She talked about needing data for measurement. What are we actually measuring when we're talking about a retirement product? It cannot be high returns and low fees. That could be part of it, but we've actually got to be much more sophisticated in what we're shooting for. And I think there's room for lots and lots of discussions about that. I think we need to balance up innovation against the potential for there to be legacy products. And as I said, I think we can pre-solve for that. And I think we just need to be confident that ultimately this reform and the advice laws will work better than they might do now. And I think that last point, that not all funds need to go it alone. That there is going to be partnering opportunities and the opportunity to get third-party providers. So that brings me to the end of my formal remarks, and it's time to hand back to John.
Thank you very much, Jeremy, and thank you to all the speakers. I think that was a terrific. Well, I learned a lot. It was a terrific set of presentations. Let me begin with a question just to get things going. I'm just wondering, for all of you, where you see the next steps. So this is 3 pages of legislation. It's been a long time coming. In the progression of from where we are to something that might happen in 2032, where do you see the first steps being taken beyond this? Maybe Jordan.
Yeah, John, happy to start off. So I think like from a Treasury perspective, like I kind of said in my remarks, we're very keen to see how industry approaches this. I really do think, given the kind of nature of legislation, that it's not prescriptive, but it is principles based, really how, for us, seeing how industry approaches the challenge of meeting for their members, of having retirement income strategies, will be really insightful over the next few years. I wouldn't want to preempt kind of beyond that what next steps are. I think, there's been across the presentations, including mine, comments around how fit for purpose the advice regime is and will be with greater intervention in retirement phase. So I think that's one of the key ones waiting to kind of see is how do funds really take their strategies and translate that into offerings for their members. So that's kind of really the next step in terms of, for me in Treasury, is seeing how is this applied and how is it taken up by members once trustees start actioning their plans.
So Jeremy or Robbie, do you have anything to add?
I think that was a pretty good summary, John.
I'll probably add a couple of things. So I think I spoke already, but I think our focus, obviously, as a trustee, will be complying with the covenant, but it will be, I think, recognising, as Jeremy said, Rome's not built in a day, so very much on a staged basis, starting with really looking at what we're already doing and how we can build on that with the certainty that the framework provides. That will include, developing some new retirement income products. So we have a great income stream, but obviously that doesn't address longevity. Now, I think for Cbus, we have a larger number of members who are at the lower end of the scale, but we certainly have, as the system matures, a growing number of members who are in that part age pension category who will benefit from a longevity offering. So, but we're very conscious that the product development is probably the easiest part, and it will be building the right engagement, experience, advice, support, guidance, nudges that will really enable this to succeed, because without that, it's not something that we know members, we know that they're not drawn to it, they don't understand it, and they won't be self-selecting for the most part. So that's probably, and I think also just noting the points that Suzanne made, and just so that APRA knows we're really thinking about it. In addition to what we're doing for members, really building the organisation muscle we need around this to make sure that these are well governed, that we have the right reviews, performance measurement, risk management, thinking about the complexity that will add in terms of investment management. So that will be what we'll be focused on.
Great. And John, can I just pick up from Robbie, because that's where I was going to go, is we introduced what we call SPS 515, which is business planning and member outcomes. And what we'd really like to see is how this becomes part of how trustees run their business, and that retirement isn't that extra thing that just happens at the end. Oh, we better focus on that. It's actually part of the whole part of what it means to be a superannuation trustee now, is that you're thinking about the through retirement phase, through into retirement phase. So for us, I think getting the strategy out is the leap off point. The hardest thing is to write something down. The easier part is to iterate once you've done it, and I think is to implore trustees to have the confidence and courage to get it written down without fear of perfection. We have worked hard with the industry on the business performance reviews over the last to think about actually looking forward, looking into the 3-year plan and then iterating. And we've seen that there was some great progress. None of them were perfect, but we're continuing to iterate. And that's what we really want to encourage, is to start somewhere. I really like the idea that Jeremy said of partnering too, to think about who can help you. We can't solve, not everyone has all the answers, but gee, there's a lot of thinking going on. So there's a lot of, I think, creativity and innovation to think about how we do that right. Jeremy, you just asked me before at the end of your topic on, what are we going to be measuring? I hope it's not all about, higher returns and lower fees. I think we will be looking at returns and fees because we need to factor those in. But I really liked the way that Robbie was thinking about how do we give members confidence and how do we measure confidence as well, because we know that engagement is just one of the hardest things, the hardest nut to crack. And I know David Bell's on this group as well. He's talked about the fact that, a lot of people are actually defaulted and they haven't actually made choices. So that how do we shift from an environment where members have been defaulted in the past to actually making choice? And that's about confidence. So I think we need to get data. We need to look at what the products are that are innovating. We do need to factor in fees and costs. But we need to also think about what are the other measures that wrap around that to know that we're making progress. Thank you, John.
So I actually have a question from Jeremy to you in the chat box. So before I move on to the raised hands, let me ask it. He says, how will APRA measure outcomes in retirement?
So I think we need to see what the products are first. We need to be able to gather the data, and we need to work with industry to see what those are. I haven't got a fixed answer for that yet, Jeremy, without knowing what the products are. I think there's been some products out there for a while and we know the take-up's been low, and we know that there's been a whole range of other factors that have contributed to that. But I think we need to work together as one of the stakeholders in the ecosystem. You listed a lot of stakeholders there, and as I encouraged in the notes that I spoke to, that we're open for business to talk to industry around the ideas that they have and what is appropriate. The question is, will there be a heat map? We haven't got a draft of a heat map on any board at the moment, but we need to get the data first to actually see what it means.
Okay, thank you very much, Suzanne. So I have a couple of raised hands. First, David Bell. Could you unmute, maybe identify where you're coming from and ask a question?
Thanks, John. David Bell from the Connexus Institute. Just to continue briefly on more ex ante measures than ex post type measures, I think that would be a really big step in maturity for the system. But my question actually relates to matching mechanisms. So the product piece is becoming clearer and clearer, but in the current setting, how can the 250,000 retirees every year actually get matched to what's appropriate to them, given all the current rules around advice and so forth? And so particularly for Robbie and particularly for Jordan, I think it's a crucial question because it goes to how much you invest sunk costs or members' funds into developing product if that matching mechanism isn't forthcoming.
So who wants to go first?
I'm happy to take first stab, John. So yeah, David, I think that you do make a really good point about what is the transmission mechanism between members hitting retirement and having a great suite of products on the shelf and making sure that members get there. And I think that's where we have heard, in feedback on consultation on this about whether advice settings are right in terms of, is there a gap between personal advice and kind of general advice? Is there something in the middle that looks like more like strategic advice that can assist members and guide them into products? And I think that's something we're looking forward to in terms of quality of advice review in seeing what industry says about their needs and requirements in that space. But it is a very good point about we can develop all the great products we want and not too many of them. I think like panels kind of commented on, but actually getting then members to take them up, given the current kind of behavioural biases to conservatism and not engaging with more complex products in retirement space, it is going to be a challenge. And I think it's something we're quite keen to watch and see how it evolves as trustees kind of take on that challenge.
I'll also throw in a couple of comments. If we build strategies that rely on every single individual member in the system seeking personal advice in order to be guided into or be able to make a selection, we will have failed. It's not sustainable or scalable at an individual or at a system level for that to be the outcome. So I think you're right, David. Finding, and in my mind, it's something more like an advanced calculator or a version of a retirement income estimate that can match, members' kind of circumstances to the types of products that will support them. And I think from an individual product provider perspective, the way we engage with that kind of strategic advice will probably be constrained by the strategies and products that we offer. So there's quite a lot of complexity, but I'm convinced that there will be a way that we can, provide and I know you've been, promoting some thinking about how that can be done. But I think it's, like we've done with retirement income estimates, with some guide rails and some, limitations or guidance about what is okay to say. I think that we can create some templated versions of guidance and nudging that will be much better than what we have currently.
If I can make a couple of quick remarks, I think the idea is that we've really got to keep the complexity under the bonnet. A lot of things in life are complex under the bonnet, but they don't have to be complex propositions to the member. And I also think that in time, it's not going to be next year, it might take a while, this will get as close to being a default. If it's not actually a default, it'll feel like it. And, that is the sort of state that we need to get to, in my view. I think we're finding our way here, but I think Robbie's point about personal advice, the sheer scale of some of the member cohorts that are moving towards and into retirement is simply too large to expect that. So I think over time, as we get to know and love these products, we'll be much more comfortable about them being soft default, effectively a default product. The trusted brand of the fund says, well, look, we've got a sufficient amount of data for you. We've looked after you for the last X decades. Here's our retirement offering. And it'll be as simple as that.
Okay, thank you. So let me go now to one of the raised hands, Anthony Asher first. Please. Anthony, are you there? Maybe not. So Jeff Warren.
Sorry, John, I am.
No,
I just was locked in the chat trying to put my question in. Thanks very much for the chance and the interesting comments. Kenneth Hayne recommended that we work at long-term simplification of the regulations by articulating principles and then working out a few examples, but that generally everyone agrees that the regulations all around are too complex, particularly those regarding advice. Now, given that the advice in the retirement space is actually pretty poorly structured. I mean, the Actuaries Institute are very concerned about the fact that the risks, both longevity and investments, are not, but the consumption risks are not particularly well articulated in any of the calculators that are out there. What's the possibility, do the panel think, of carving advice out of the current regulations and using it as an, in a sense of stalking horse, if you like, for an alternative approach that articulates principles and pushes back the responsibility for the development of these things to the industry rather than getting the regulator to think about it? I mean, David Bell and Pamela Hanrahan have got a suggestion on just one single calculator, which is another possibility. But just the idea is, can we innovate in the advice regulation space in the next year?
Can I have a go at that?
Sure.
Disclosure: I've been assisting in relation to that particular project. Look, I think there is and of course we're speculating here, which you can do when you're talking about the future, not the present. But I do think that there is an opportunity to treat retirement income advice within the prudentially regulated envelope. In other words, if you're giving advice in relation to APRA supervised entities, i.e. banking products, life insurance products, annuities, and prudentially supervised super funds vis-a-vis retirement, should you indeed be in a separate regime? That would exclude Smurfs because they're out, the sort of range of products that you can be exposed to out in that, that would be an appropriate trade-off. But if somebody's giving us in that APRA regulated envelope about retirement, maybe we do need to create a separate regime. After all, the reason we have such fierce advice laws is because in Australia consumers can consume products that are effectively unimaginable in any other system. You've only got to go to the UK or the US to see how confined the product universe is for consumers. So that's why we've got ourselves largely into the situation we're in at the moment. And maybe a way through this is to create a specific regime for retirement income advice within the safety, if you like, of the APRA regulated universe.
Any other panelists want to add to that at this stage?
I might add a comment to that. I think there just needs to be caution because obviously, I think it's clear that the advice laws have led to unintended consequences. But I also think we need to caution against, the pendulum swinging too far back the other way and having a system where there is opportunity for, mis-selling or poor outcomes for consumers. I think I would agree there is something worth exploring in terms of what Jeremy's proposed, because I think obviously there are quite significant obligations on trustees. And so within that prudentially regulated system, the member outcomes framework could be utilised to supervise at an aggregate level what advice outcomes are being achieved. And that would be a really good safety mechanism for ensure sound consumer outcomes.
Thank you. So let me go to another hands up question. Jeff Warren.
Okay.
Please
Thanks,
tell us where
John.
you're from.
Jeff Warren from Australian National University. I'm going to go back and have another go at David's point about the matching, and this sort of leans on a paper that we co-wrote over this issue. And you could look at it, the matching can happen as a push or a pull. It could be, currently I think we're envisaging a system, or we're heading towards a system which is entirely pull. That is, the member decides either by looking at a menu and picking from that menu, perhaps looking at a calculator, perhaps looking at a bit of information, and hopefully taking some advice. And the other way it could occur is the fund could actually make a recommendation, and that was envisaged under the original CEPAR design. And that moves it even closer to a default, and defaults are quite powerful, and they have a lot of benefit to them. As the research says, they're powerful. People anchor on them. You can embed nudges in a lot more importantly. So my question is that does the panel see that an important role for the fund to be able to make a recommendation to their member as part of the system? And if so, of course, the advice rules would have to accommodate that, but is it important to have that in the system?
So who wants to go first? No one.
John, I'll have a go. I mean, I think you make a really good point, Jeff, and it's about confidence. And if I sort of think about myself, you know, you get to the end and I think a lot of members think, well, what do I do now? And when we were talking in advance of this panel, I was talking to Robbie and we were talking about, you know, the concept of competition and how do you compete for members. And it wasn't where we went to, are we competing about a product that's all about selling, or are we competing on trust and how a member experiences their superannuation? And if you're in a fund that you trust and has built confidence over many, many years, and you get to the end, I think you'd hope that they were going to provide some sort of help. But I think it's what are the parameters that we sit around that to ensure that it's in the best interests of the member and the best financial interests of the member that those recommendations flow through. But I think it's about how do we help members, because it's confidence and trust that to me feels to be just such a fundamental element of leaping them into this product. Their money's been locked up for all these years, they haven't been able to get to it. All of a sudden they get access and you say, well, we're going to put it away again into something else. So to have the confidence to do that feels to me that having some sort of signal from a trustee that says we up to the point of being able to make a recommendation that is in the best interests of members. So I don't know that it goes to gives you a direct answer, but I think it's a bit of a framing of the why it's important that we just try and provide that level of support and transition.
Thank you. Anyone else, or should I move on? David Williams.
Thanks very much, John. Fabulous discussion, guys. Really appreciate the insights. I'd just like to suggest, though, we need to step outside our conventional wisdoms a bit. What we're trying to deal with is individuals who have a lifespan. If they don't understand, they don't really know what to do about prolonging it or making the best of it. And if we start from the right point, we have a reasonable chance of helping each individual to engage with why they're different and what is causing it, and therefore what they might do about it, including financial decisions. Start at the beginning and you'll get a good journey. Start halfway through it, you've got to keep backtracking. So I'd like to suggest this thought that we do start with how long. We know the life tables are completely inadequate. It's outrageous that they should be used as a basis for projections, not because the average number is wrong, but because nobody is either average or knows they're average, or whether they're average or not. And therefore the tables are misleading, not simply useless, because they offer no real insight into what a person is like. So I'd like to offer those thoughts. One more comment, just remind everyone, I ran 2 financial planning business and was a starter of the 3rd, Retire Invest. I know what financial planners are like pretty well, and they're really in the doghouse right now. But we should reflect on the fact that a prudentially supervised group of owners, namely the banks, completely destroy the reputation of that industry. Very few planners have been put on the grid as a result of the Royal Commission, but a heck of a lot of the banks have, with massive financial repercussions. So I'd be very cautious about rushing into prudential supervision as a satisfactory oversight for good advice.
Right. Is there any reactions from the panel?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Maybe I'll go to the first part of your, maybe we'll exclude banks from my idea about prudential supervision. But I'll go to the, I think you make a really good point. You make a really good point. And this is I'm so glad you've asked this question, because this is where I think not just consumers, but the industry itself has been fooled by the life expectancy concept. So all very well when you're a challenger and you've got thousands and thousands of lives, and those averages are very meaningful. But for the individual, they are just absolute garbage. So for a 65-year-old woman today, she gets told her life expectancy is 90, which is mortality improved. So that is, insofar as that is a correct statement. However, 2/3 of women in that situation are going to die somewhere between the age of 82 and 98. We don't know. We might be talking to someone across the desk. We don't know where in that range that person, what their lifespan is, and that is a fact, and it is a fact with which this industry, the DC part of super, is not familiar. And I think the concept of the period of retirement and how the strategy, what that actually is, and how the strategy meets it, is going to be the single most difficult thing for this industry to get its head around. I think APRA is going to have to show some leadership here, because a lot of people in this industry are going to be absolutely clueless about these issues. So thanks, David. That was an absolute cracker of a question. And I think that the key point I'm making here is that one-on-one, individually, talking to people about pool averages, it's a life insurance concept, and it is not fit for purpose at the member level. And this industry's really quickly got to get on board with just that issue.
Okay, so there are a couple of questions in the chat box. I've got one from Jonathan V from UNSW. He says, from APRA's perspective, so this is one for you, Suzanne, what are the reasons behind the low take-up for some of the existing retirement products in the market? Do they provide any light on, I guess the question is really, do they provide any light on where we should go with this process?
Well, maybe, because I think there hasn't been a proliferation of products. So, I mean, and Jeremy's probably even better able to qualified to comment on this. I might go to him afterwards. But my experience when, prior to even joining APRA, when I was working with super funds, was that not all trustees offered them. So they weren't available to all members. The trustees that did offer them were very cautious about how they were offered. It was all about, very much advice-based. And so to the point that a member really needed to have that one-on-one personal advice before they went into them. And then there were sweet spots around which trustees would think that you had to have a certain amount of money to actually go into some of these products. And then, at which point, if you had too little or too much, they weren't quite right. So I think it was a number of factors, to my experience. I don't believe APRA's done any particular analysis on that. So that was really more some of the observations from my experience. But I'd welcome any of my other panellists to see whether they had any other thoughts, John.
Okay,
I'll take the hand pass there, Suzanne. Look, I think largely it's about framing. So how have people offering longevity products, but whether that's advisors or issuers, how have they spoken to members, and how does this industry think about and communicate about products? And it's investment based. This is another accumulation problem. So everybody wants to know that they're going to get a high return. They're kind of oblivious to the risk that's going on. And so when you get to retirement, what this reform is going to do is that part of the mix, and it'll be a minority part of it generally, will be more about the consumption, more about the risk management. It's about the framing, because if you compare a longevity product with a growth-oriented asset mix, and you're comparing them on the returns basis, which is how this industry, that's what the wealth management industry delivers. It's a Maslow's hammer problem. If you're comparing a pear with a peach, that's a problem. And so unfortunately, this industry is so caught up with, and advisors think their value proposition in all circumstances is about high returns. Through that frame, the longevity product, which is a very, very socially useful product, not because of the longevity things and under the bonnet thing. What it gives you is confidence to spend next week, next year, the year after that. You don't even talk about longevity. It's a bit like talking about a twin overhead camshaft. It's just not something that people can consume. But if you say, well, look, this mixture is going to give you growth and it's going to give you lifetime income, people will understand those concepts.
Yeah, Jeremy, I'd absolutely support those comments. I think, the behavioural biases we see in retirees aren't helped by how we frame drawdown for them. So when we talk, we implicitly start talking about making sure their capital lasts for them, making sure they have money beyond certain ages, and all that does is kind of reinforce those biases rather than talking about safety to spend. And having a better living standard as well. So I think, some recasting of how we talk about retirement and the risks within it would definitely go a long way to achieving some of these aims.
Yes, I think framing is extremely important, and academics go on a lot about it. The Swiss experience is interesting. They have a system not altogether unlike ours, but the way in which benefits are taken depends upon the pension fund you belong to. And what the pension fund's default is, income or lump sum, seems to very largely determine what people take. And of course, it's cast around a set of communications that are consistent with that default. So I think it's extremely important. This framing question, I think, is very vital.
John, can I also chime in there?
Yeah, sure.
So just to return to the topic of retirement income estimates. So Cbus has run a program for a number of years where we deliver retirement income estimates to every member who is eligible to receive one, including a personalised video version of that. And we have some research being done with academics around the impact that has. And we know that framing superannuation in terms of future income generation completely changes the game. So I would really endorse the comments that have been made around framing and point to how effective retirement income estimates can be in achieving that.
And this does, if I can just chime in here, this is why it's so important that APRA's outcomes measurements dovetails in with what we've just been talking about. If it's just about high fees, if it's just about high returns and low fees and doesn't grapple with this sort of consumption and it seems to me there are four areas where measurement, you just do an ex ante. I love David Bell's ex ante idea that you basically say, does this product deal with the market risk, inflation risk, longevity risk on, secondly, or fourthly, so that's three things. And fourthly, how does it engage with the period of retirement concept? That's really what I'm talking about in terms of measurement. I think it's ex ante. It's not necessarily, well, you do both. You sort of say, is this likely to satisfy these three things? And then you'd have to measure how it was going, in my view.
Any other panel reactions, or should I move on? I have a question from Nick Khalil. Will Treasury or APRA, what we're looking for here is a commitment, right? Will Treasury or APRA facilitate publication of relevant aggregate data to help funds formulate their retiree cohorts?
Yeah, so John, I'm happy to attempt to answer this one without giving a commitment. To be against my public servant DNA to offer any commitments in a forum like this. But I did say it in my remarks. So this was an issue raised with us across kind of policy and legislation consultation, and it's something we're endeavouring to look at. So currently, it's something that Treasury is doing, is kind of looking at what government-held data could be made available for funds in a way that doesn't kind of breach any tax secrecy rules, but it's also not horribly expensive or complex to administer to provide that to trustees. So yeah, there's something we're definitely looking at, but yeah, no commitments as to whether that's a government policy at this point in time.
Suzanne?
I think, like Jordan, being in the public service, I wouldn't want to make a public commitment, but no, I think we're working closely with Treasury on all of these elements. So I think I haven't got anything to add to Jordan's comment.
Okay. So I wanted to ask a question, I guess primarily of Jordan, but also I think the whole panel. And it's around the tax incentives and disincentives that are associated with these developing retirement income streams versus lump sums, and how there is an interaction between the age pension and those, right? So there are various ways in which taking out a retirement income stream can be disadvantageous in terms of age pension receipts. And I wanted to get a feel for whether you all thought that was a major issue in this ongoing process.
So John, I think so. In terms of, there has been some government action around innovative income streams income streams that do have deferred elements, having at least better social security treatment to be in line with account-based products. So there's some changes that have been made to kind of spur innovation across the sector, and there are products kind of taking advantage of those rules that are coming to market. So we kind of interested to see how that still progresses. I would say though, kind of my judgment in like having worked in this space, especially the kind of post-retirement space for a few years now, in terms of policy, is that it really is still the behavioural biases that are driving decision-making rather than tax outcomes. Maybe there's more kind of potentially in the SMSF higher wealth sector that drives tax planning around product selection. But really, I think for the majority of choices, it is more around, like we talked about, behavioural biases and framing rather than necessarily tax incentives or disincentives.
Okay, thank you very much. We are beginning to run out of time. I'm just looking at this range of questions here. I guess I think I might just finalize this with one final question. Is there a lot of public risk in this? So if I think particularly of Cbus, for example, with this lower income cohort, right? In 2014, we had a budget which proposed removing wage indexation from the age pension, right? Effectively. Never came to fruition, but I understand that something like that has occurred to the basic pension in the UK in the last couple of months. Is that a risk which is, do you think, in some way implicitly factored in to the supposed underconsumption that we observe by superannuation fund retirees?
I might offer a view. I don't think that the reasons why there's poor engagement or take up are rational. I think it's about a lack of capability, members being overwhelmed, and it's the psychological biases. And the other one that I was going to offer is, members are often thinking about when they're going to die, which is above the traditional psychological biases we observe in financial decision making. For our members in particular, when they're at the point of retirement, it's generally not a happy time, and then they have to start thinking about when they're going to die. So I don't think it's about rational causes. I think it's about engagement, building better supports and nudges and capability. And that will be where the breakthrough will come.
And that's very consistent with where the retirement income covenant is going.
Can I pick up on Suzanne's observation about, I think she talked about inspiration. I'd call it passion. I think if the super industry became more passionate about giving members their money back in a very useful way in retirement, and less about building up big pots of money and buying sexy assets and going to conferences and all that sort of stuff. If there was real passion and real measurement of, oh, gee, we're doing such a good job, not because we've got all this, we've just bought another sexy asset, but look how many members, let's measure, some funds do this, but I think it's having that passion of actually, look, this whole system is about giving people a better standard of living in retirement, not just building up massive amounts and then just leaving to them to their own devices. So, and I sense that is around the issue, but I think it's you've got to be able to measure it and track it, and you've got to have passion around it.
Maybe that's a good spot to close the session. We're just over time. Look, thank you very much to all four of you. I think it's been a terrific session, and thank you also to those who participated and asked questions. There are some questions on the chat, which we didn't get to, so perhaps they can be communicated in other ways. So we've got a reactions here with an applause, and we'll do that. Thank you so much.